My name is Grace. I'm 31. And honestly, I never thought I'd be one of those people writing their story to strangers online. But I guess this is the only place where no one interrupts me and says, "You need to move on," because I'm not ready. Not yet. I've lived in Chicago for over 10 years. This city isn't about peace, it moves. It burns. It never stops. And maybe that's exactly why I fell for Jason. He was like the heart of this city. Loud, alive, a little dangerous, but impossible to resist. We met at the cafe where I worked after college. He came in on a Wednesday, just an ordinary day, but there was something in his smile that made the world tilt beneath me. I didn't know then that the same smile would one day break me. At first, everything was perfect. He had a way of talking that made every word sound like the truth. He kissed me like it was the last time, even if it was just a Sunday afternoon. We laughed at nothing, watched movies all night, and I truly believed that this was what happiness looked like. But then came work. His business started growing, deals, meetings, late-night calls. And the higher he climbed, the further away he drifted. I noticed how he stopped answering calls around me, how he'd flip his phone face down the moment I walked into the room. One evening I asked him straight out, "Are you hiding something from me?" He just smiled and said, "Grace, don't start. You're just being jealous." I tried to believe it was all in my head, but then I found the message. Just one, short, simple, "I miss you." Not my name, not my tone, not my story. I didn't say a word. I just stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. I looked empty, like a ghost of the woman who used to laugh with him in that cafe. I cried quietly, so he wouldn't hear, because if he did, it would mean I'd already lost. Everything changed after that. I learned to stay silent, to smile, to pretend. But every touch felt colder, every kiss distant. And when he finally said he was leaving on a business trip for a week, I just nodded. But that night, when he didn't come home at all, I knew it wasn't work. And now I'm here, writing this at midnight, while Chicago hums outside my window. And inside my apartment, silence. The silence after the storm. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Usually, I'd wake up to the smell of his coffee. He always made it strong, with 2 spoons of sugar, and left a cup for me on the stove. But this time, nothing. The silence was louder than any words. I grabbed my phone. No messages, no calls. At first, I tried to convince myself that he really had gone on a business trip. Maybe he forgot to text. Maybe he was just busy. But then, I saw his Instagram story. He was at a bar, laughing, and next to him her. I remember that moment so vividly, as if time itself stopped. It felt like someone punched me straight in the chest. I inhaled, and the air turned into pain. She was blonde, in a red dress, with the same smile I once loved on myself. And I realized he wasn't even trying to hide it. I sat on the floor, holding my phone as tears filled my eyes. Not because he cheated, but because I let myself believe. In him, in us. I didn't text. I didn't call. But that night, he came home. The door opened quietly, like a thief in his own house. I was sitting on the couch. No makeup, no smile. Just a cold cup of coffee in front of me. "Where were you?" I asked. He sighed without looking at me. "I told you. A meeting." "And was she at that meeting too?" My voice trembled. He went silent, and that silence hurt more than any confession ever could. He just walked to the bedroom without another word. Didn't even try to explain. And that's when I understood. What once was love had become nothing but habit. I sat there all night, listening to someone I once called mine sleep peacefully behind the wall. Well, I couldn't sleep at all. The next day, I decided I had to do something, anything. I put on my jacket, my headphones, and went outside. Chicago greeted me with a gray sky and cold wind. People hurried past, busy with their own lives, not noticing the woman walking beside them with a breaking heart. I stopped by the river, turned on some music, and just stood there. And for a brief moment, I felt that the pain was still there, but it didn't scare me anymore. Maybe that's how healing starts, when you still cry, but not from despair. You cry because you're slowly finding yourself again. It had been 2 weeks since I saw that story. 2 weeks since I realized that you can be alive and dead inside at the same time. Every morning I'd wake up, make coffee without sugar now. He always added too much and forced myself to smile in the mirror, like an actress playing the role of a woman who's fine. No one was supposed to know that I was falling apart. Not even me. I started going to the park, listening to music, watching people. It helped me stop thinking. Chicago looked perfect in the fall, cold but alive. People hurried by. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had stopped. One day, I walked into a cafe, a new one near the river. It smelled like cinnamon and fresh croissants. The barista smiled and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." And for the first time in a long while, I replied honestly, "Thank you. You too." It might sound small, but something shifted inside me, like someone had lifted a heavy stone off my chest. And then I heard a familiar voice. "Grace?" I turned and there he was. Jason. He looked calm to calm. A new coat, that same confidence that once made me fall for him. But now, instead of warmth, I felt cold. She wasn't with him. He was alone. "You look good," he said. I smiled. "Thanks. It's the loneliness. It does strange things to women." He hesitated. "Grace, I wanted to text you. I just didn't know how." "You know," I breathed. "I didn't know how to live without you either. But somehow I did." He went silent, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. Maybe he felt the loss too, or maybe just guilt. We stood there, two strangers who once meant everything to each other. Then he walked away. No kiss, no goodbye, and I realized this was it, the real ending. When I stepped outside, the wind picked up. I inhaled the cold air deep into my lungs, and for the first time in a long while it didn't hurt. 3 months passed. 3 months without him, without his voice, without his scent, and strangely enough, without his shadow. Breathing became easier. I went back to work, not the same cafe, of course. Now I worked at a small bookstore in the north of Chicago. It smelled like dust, coffee, and old pages, and somehow, among all that, I found peace. I could look at people coming in and not think about him. At least I tried. One day, while I was shelving new books, he came in. Not Jason, someone else. His name was Nick. He didn't look like the kind of men I used to fall for. Simple clothes, slightly messy hair, a smile that didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. He was looking for a Hemingway novel, but instead of just buying it, he started talking. "Have you read A Farewell to Arms?" "I used to." "Too much pain," I said. "Maybe that's because it's true." He smiled. We talked for half an hour, and for the first time in months, I caught myself laughing. Genuinely, freely. He started coming back. First, by chance, then not so much. He'd bring me coffee, ask how my day was, and one time he said, "You know, you have a smile that could stop a war." I smiled, but something inside me ached, because I'd heard those words before. The past wouldn't let go. Every gesture of his reminded me of Jason, not because they were alike. They weren't. I just hadn't learned how to compare. Still, I let him stay, slowly, carefully. We'd walk through Chicago at night, laugh about silly things, talk about books, about dreams, about how sometimes you just want to start over. One evening, he took my hand, and I didn't pull away, but somewhere deep inside, I knew that hand still remembered another, and maybe that was the scariest part, to feel the warmth of a new touch, yet still remember the old one. They say pain fades with time, but I've learned it doesn't fade. It just hides deeper. Things with Nick were calm. Too calm, if I'm honest. After Jason, I'd grown used to passion, fights, the kind of emotions that burnt from the inside out. But this was warmth, gentle, and I was scared. I didn't know how to accept it. One evening, he invited me to a photo exhibition, a small gallery downtown, golden light, soft music, everything felt like a scene from a movie. I was laughing. He held me by the waist, and for a brief second, I thought I might actually be happy again, until I heard the voice behind me. "Grace?" I turned around. Jason. He looked almost the same, maybe a little more tired, but that same confidence in his eyes. That same voice that once made me tremble. The world seemed to stop spinning. "Hi," he said, with a small smile at the corner of his lips. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound calm. Nick stood beside me, trying to figure out who this was. "This is Jason," I finally said. "My ex." "Nice to meet you," Nick said, offering his hand. Jason shook it, but his eyes never left mine. That looked familiar, dangerous. And I knew it was all starting again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Nick asked who he was, and I told him the truth. But not all of it. I didn't tell him how long I'd cried over that man. How I'd hated him and loved him at the same time. Because even now, after everything, my heart still raced when I thought about him. A few days later, I got a message. "You look happy, but I know it's just a mask." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Not because I was scared, but because he was right. The past doesn't ask permission. It just comes back and destroys what you've only just begun to build. After that message, I tried not to respond. I deleted it, even blocked his number. But the past doesn't disappear that easily, it always finds another way in. A few days later, he was standing outside the bookstore where I worked. I saw him through the window, tall, in a black coat, carrying that same confidence that once made me forget how to breathe. When I stepped outside, he just said, "Grace, I need to talk." I wanted to walk right past him. I really did. But my body didn't listen. We sat in the cafe across the street. He ordered for me the same thing as before, a vanilla cappuccino. "You look different," he said. "Stronger." "That tends to happen when you've been betrayed," I replied. He didn't flinch, just nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry." Those words sounded almost sincere. Almost. And that almost was the most dangerous part. We talked for over an hour, about everything and nothing. And I caught myself listening the way I used to with my heart, not my head. When he touched my hand, I felt something tighten inside me. My mind screamed no, but my heart stayed silent. That evening, Nick called. "Want to meet tomorrow?" he asked. "Sure," I said. But deep down, guilt had already moved in. Because the whole time we talked, I wasn't thinking about Nick. The next day, Jason texted again. "You look happy when you're with him, but you never laughed like that with me. Did you?" And I realized he knew. He always knew where to strike. That night, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at myself, asking, why? Why do I let the man who broke me keep finding his way back in? There was no answer. Just a heart that beat faster every time I thought of his name. And maybe that's the real trap, knowing the fire will burn you, but reaching for it anyway. That evening, he texted again. "I just need to see you. Once. No drama, no past. I promise." I stared at the screen, knowing I should delete it. But instead, I reread it. Again and again. Then I typed back, "Okay." We met outside the same cafe where our us once began. When he walked up, I saw something different in his eyes, not confidence, but exhaustion. Maybe he hadn't found peace either. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "I thought I could forget you, but I can't." "You already did," I replied. "You just remembered when you got lonely." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But that doesn't change the fact that I still don't," I interrupted. "Don't say it." But he stepped closer, and I caught that same scent, familiar, warm, dangerous. And all my walls came crashing down. We walked through the city until late at night, talked about the past, about nothing, about things that couldn't be undone. And somewhere between words, between pauses, I realized I was letting him back in. Quietly, slowly. When he walked me home, I said, "Don't come in." "Why not?" "Because if you do, it all starts again." He looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Okay, but just know I'm still here." And he left. I stood by the door, listening to his footsteps fade. And for the first time in a long while, I cried, not from pain, but from helplessness. Because I knew I'd already made a mistake. I'd let the past get too close. The next day, Nick noticed something was off. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just tired." But he looked into my eyes and he knew. And in that look, I saw fear, not jealousy, not anger, fear of losing me. And I stayed silent. Because how do you explain that? You're haunted by something that should have died long ago. Nick didn't hear it from me. And maybe that's what made it worse. I came into work that morning like always. Everything looked normal until he walked in. No smile, no coffee in his hand, just standing in the doorway, looking at me. His face was calm, but his eyes said everything. "You saw him," he said quietly. I didn't even have time to lie. Yes, just one word, but it hit like a verdict. He stood there for a few seconds, then asked, "Why?" And I didn't know what to say, because truth isn't just one thing. It's pieces: fear, memory, weakness, loneliness. And how do you explain that to someone who truly loves you? "I didn't plan it," I whispered. "He just showed up, and I couldn't walk away." "But you could have," he replied. No anger, no shouting, just truth. And somehow, that hurt even more. I stepped closer, tried to touch his hand, but he pulled away. "You know," he said, "I always thought the past could hurt, but not kill." I was wrong. He left, no goodbye, and this time it felt final. I stood in the middle of the store, as people came and went, while something inside me broke apart. I'd lost the man who wanted to love me right, because of the one who never knew how. That night, I went to Jason's, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to put the pain. He opened the door, surprised. "Grace?" I just said. "I ruined everything." He held me, and in that embrace, I felt no comfort, only emptiness. Because at that moment, I realized I didn't want him. I just didn't know how to live without him. The next morning, I woke up in his apartment. There was a half-finished glass of wine on the table, his phone buzzing with messages beside it. He was asleep, calm, peaceful, as if guilt didn't exist in his world. I looked at him for a long time, at that face that once felt like the whole universe to me. And for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a person who didn't know how to love anyone, not even himself. I picked up his phone, not because I wanted to, but because my hand just moved on its own. And there, among dozens of chats, was a name. Another woman. Messages. "When are you coming back? I miss you." My heart clenched, not from pain, but from exhaustion. He'd betrayed me again, even now, when I'd come back. And in that moment, I realized it was never about me. He just needed someone to love him while he couldn't stand himself. I stood up, quietly put on my coat, left the key on the kitchen counter. As the sun rose outside, I walked through the cold Chicago streets, and for the first time, I didn't feel lost. He called that evening. "Grace, I can explain." "Don't. I'm done listening to your explanations." Silence. Then, "I love you." "No," I said softly. "You love being loved. That's not the same thing." I hung up and felt silence. Not the heavy kind that crushes you, the kind that frees you, the kind that comes when the war inside finally ends. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't wait. I just sat by the window, watching the city fade into night, and thought, maybe this is what freedom looks like when even the pain becomes part of your healing. A month has passed, and I've stopped counting the days. Chicago, the city that once felt like both my home and my prison, now feels too loud. Every sound reminds me of someone I no longer am. I've realized that sometimes healing means leaving not just the person, but everything that ties you to them. I gave up my apartment, sold most of my things, kept only a few books, my favorite cup, and the old sweater, the one I wore the night everything fell apart. It doesn't represent pain anymore. Now it represents strength. That morning, I got on a train, rain on the window, quiet music in my headphones, and something inside my chest finally loosened. Not happiness, peace. As the train began to move, I watched the city fade into the distance and thought, I'm not the woman he broke anymore. Now I know love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes, love means leaving. I don't know where this train will take me, maybe to a new city, maybe just back to myself. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid. I wrote one final line in my notebook. My heart doesn't hurt anymore. It just lives. And as the sun appeared through the clouds, I smiled, because I finally understood. This isn't the end. It's the first page of my new life.